November 1, 1943, North Atlantic. A 23-year-old destroyer slams into a German submarine at full speed. But the ship doesn't strike the U-boat broadside. Instead, a massive wave lifts the destroyer's bow at the exact moment of impact, and the American warship lands on top of the submarine, high-centered like a car on a curb, pinning it to the surface. For the next 15 minutes, the two vessels are locked together, rocking violently in 20-foot swells, so close that the crews can see each other's faces in the darkness. And they fight with knives, with shotguns, with thrown shell casings, with anything they can grab. When it's over, one ship will sink with all hands. The other will sink the next day, drowning 27 of her own crew during rescue operations. How did a Naval Academy graduate who quit the Navy to run his father-in-law's packing company in Indiana transform into the commander of the most savage destroyer-submarine duel since the age of John Paul Jones? To understand what happened that night, you need to understand where these men were and what they were fighting against. November 1943, the North Atlantic. For 2 years, German U-boats have been slaughtering Allied convoys trying to supply Britain. In 1942 alone, submarines sank over 6 million tons of Allied shipping. Ships were going down faster than they could be built. But there was a problem. American destroyers were hunting in packs now, working with small escort carriers. And they were getting good at it. Between July and November 1943, one task group alone, centered around the escort carrier USS Card, had sunk 9 U-boats. On one side, German submarine wolf packs. Intelligence reported 25 to 50 U-boats operating within 300 nautical miles. Each Type 7C submarine carried 14 torpedoes, an 88mm deck gun, and 6 rapid-fire autocannons. On the other side, USS Borie, a Clemson-class destroyer. Commissioned in 1920, the same year Prohibition started, she was already obsolete when World War II began. She displaced 1,214 tons, carried 4 4-inch guns from the First World War, and could barely make 35 knots on a good day. It was David versus Goliath. And worse, the environment was trying to kill everyone equally. Air temperature near freezing. Water temperature 44 degrees Fahrenheit. 20-foot waves that would grow to 40 feet by the next morning. Gale force winds. Dense fog. Heavy rain. The kind of North Atlantic weather that drowns men in minutes, not hours. This wasn't just submarine warfare. It was submarine warfare in conditions that made rescue nearly impossible. And in command of that aging destroyer was Charles Herbert Hutchins, 30 years old, average height, clean cut. If you saw him in a photograph, you wouldn't think he was a combat commander. You'd think he was, well, exactly what he had been just 2 years earlier, a businessman running a packing company in Terre Haute, Indiana. Hutchins was born in 1913 in Muncie, Indiana. Middle-class family. Smart kid. Smart enough to get into the Naval Academy at Annapolis, where he graduated in 1936. But here's the thing. Charles Hutchins served exactly 2 years as a naval officer, then resigned his commission in 1938 to work at his father-in-law's packing company. Think about that. Naval Academy graduate, officer training, 2 years of active duty. Then he walks away to sell meat in Indiana. Then Pearl Harbor happened, December 7th, 1941. Hutchins was 28 years old, sitting in Terre Haute, watching newsreels of the Pacific Fleet burning in Hawaii. Every ship he'd trained on, every Naval Academy classmate he knew, gone or fighting. So he didn't wait to be drafted. He went back. The Navy recommissioned him as Lieutenant Junior Grade, a demotion from the rank he'd left with. They assigned him to destroyers. Old destroyers. The kind they were pulling out of reserve because they needed every hull that could float. But Hutchins had something most career officers didn't have. He'd spent 4 years outside the military structure, 4 years making decisions in business, 4 years learning that sometimes you have to take calculated risks that look insane on paper. The Navy taught Hutchins tactics, gunnery, navigation, and command protocol. But civilian life taught him improvisation, decision-making under uncertainty, the willingness to try unconventional solutions when conventional ones won't work. The Navy made him a destroyer commander, but terra haute made him someone willing to ram a submarine at full speed and see what happened. The Naval Academy taught Hutchins how to fight ships according to doctrine. Destroyer duty taught Hutchins how to hunt submarines with depth charges and sonar. But business taught Hutchins that when the textbook answer won't work, you do what will work, even if it's never been done before. Hutchins took command of USS Borie on June 6, 1943. For the next 5 months, he drilled his crew relentlessly. Most were reservists like him, civilians in uniform. They practiced gunnery, anti-aircraft drills, depth charge patterns, over and over. By late October 1943, Borie was operating as part of Task Group 21.14, screening the escort carrier USS Card. They'd already been in action. On October 31st, just one day before our story, Borie engaged a different submarine, U-256. Damaged it, forced it to crash dive. Hutchins sent a message to Card that night. "Scratch one pig boat, am searching for more." And in each engagement, Hutchins was aggressive, unconventional. He didn't follow the cautious playbook. When he detected a submarine, he went after it at full speed, depth charges ready, guns manned, pushing his old destroyer harder than the engineering manual said she could handle. The Navy taught him to be methodical, but Indiana had taught him to be bold, and on November 1st, 1943, all of that would be tested in ways no one could have imagined. At 1:53 a.m., Borie's radar picked up a contact 8,000 yards away. Another submarine. Hutchins didn't hesitate. Full speed ahead. Closed the distance. The radar contact disappeared at 2,800 yards. The U-boat had crash dived. Borie's sonar operator picked it up immediately. They ran in, dropped a pattern of depth charges. Minutes later, the submarine broached the surface 400 yards away, clearly damaged, unable to stay submerged. This was the moment every destroyer captain trained for: a surfaced U-boat, damaged, vulnerable. But it was also one of the most dangerous situations in naval warfare. Surfaced U-boats were armed like small warships, deck guns, autocannons, torpedoes. They could still kill you. Hutchins made his decision in seconds, close to point-blank range. Engage with every gun that would bear, and if the submarine tried to dive again, ram it. It was aggressive. It was risky. By the book, you were supposed to stand off and shell submarines from safe distance. Hutchins went straight at it. Borie's crew manned 3 weapon systems: the 4-inch main battery guns, World War I vintage, but still deadly; the 3-inch anti-aircraft gun; and 2 Oerlikon 20mm autocannons, the only weapons that could traverse fast enough to track a close target in heavy seas. Hutchins ordered Borie directly toward the submarine, closing from 400 yards to point-blank range while his guns opened fire. Tracers lit up the night. The 20mm Oerlikons poured fire onto U-405's conning tower and deck. And here's the trick. Hutchins wasn't just charging straight at the submarine. He was watching its maneuvers, reading its captain's intentions, trying to predict which way it would turn. Just as a businessman reads his competitor's next move, Hutchins was reading his enemy's tactics. The German commander, Korvettenkapitän Rolf-Heinrich Hopman, a skilled veteran, turned hard to port, trying to keep his stern toward Borie, trying to bring his own weapons to bear. U-405's deck crew opened fire with 6 autocannons. The 88mm deck gun swung toward Borie. Borie's guns hit it first. 3 4-inch shells tore the 80mm gun clean off the submarine's deck. The range closed to 300 yards. 200. 100. Fire Controlman Robert Maher, stationed in the gun director, later wrote, "The roar and smell of battle was just unimaginable. Watching the converging streams of 20mm bullets was both horrifying and fascinating." Borie's 20mm fire was killing every German sailor who appeared on U-405's deck. Bodies fell into the water. Others took their places, still firing back. Hutchins spoke into the voice tube. "Stand by for ram." And then a massive wave lifted Borie's bow. The collision didn't happen the way anyone expected. U-405 turned hard to port. Borie's bow rose on the crest of a 20-foot wave. Instead of striking the submarine's whole broadside, the way ramming tactics were designed, Borie's bow came down on top of U-405's foredeck. The destroyer, riding the wave, landed on the submarine like a seesaw, the bow high-centered on U-405's pressure hull. For 10 to 15 minutes, the two ships were locked together, rising and falling in the swells, metal grinding against metal, neither able to break free. The German crew knew they had one chance: kill everyone on Borie's deck and main guns before the destroyer broke free. Men emerged from U-405's hatches, trying to man their remaining autocannons. They were met by a hail of small arms fire. The distance between the ship's crews was measured in feet, not yards. 30 feet at the widest point, 20 feet where the hulls pressed together, 15 feet where the conning towers almost touched. Some eyewitnesses said the distance was less than 10 feet in places, so close that Chief Boatswain's mate Walter Kurtz grabbed an empty 4-inch shell casing, a brass cylinder weighing over 30 pounds, and hurled it at a German sailor on the submarine's deck. The casing hit the German in the chest, knocked him backward into the Atlantic. Why were they fighting like this? Because Borie's main guns couldn't depress low enough to hit the submarine pressed beneath them, and U-405's autocannons couldn't elevate high enough to hit Borie's superstructure towering above. So the crews fought with whatever they could grab. Hutchins' men fired Thompson submachine guns, rifles, pistols, shotguns that were supposed to be for riot control. One sailor fired a very pistol, a flare gun, directly into a German sailor's chest. One American threw a sheath knife. It killed a German emerging from a hatch. Robert Maher watched a German sailor get hit by 20mm fire. He later wrote, "It was a sight that was to give me nightmares for months." Borie's 24-inch searchlight illuminated every German who appeared. As each man emerged from the conning tower hatch to reach the bridge, he was immediately met by concentrated fire. It wasn't naval warfare, it was medieval combat on a modern warship. And both crews knew, when these ships broke apart, one of them was going to die. But there was a problem. Borie was being destroyed from underneath. Minute 5 of the ramming. U-405's pressure hull was designed to withstand crush depth, hundreds of feet underwater. Thick steel, heavy reinforcing beams, built to handle immense pressure. Borie's hull was designed to cut through water at high speed. Thinner steel, lighter construction. Every time a wave lifted both ships and slammed them back together, Borie's hull plating buckled. Seams opened, rivets popped. Water poured into the forward engine room. Lieutenant Morrison R. Brown, the engineering officer, was stationed in that compartment. As seawater flooded in, he stood at the throttle controls, neck-deep in water, keeping the engine running while ordering his men to evacuate. The ship pitched and rolled. Debris slammed into him. The water rose to his chin. He stayed at the controls. Finally, after 10 to 15 minutes that felt like hours, another massive wave lifted Borie high enough to slide off U-405's deck. The ships separated. Distance, 50 yards, 100 yards. Both vessels were damaged. Both were still fighting. What followed was a 64-minute running gun battle. U-405's captain Hopman was brilliant. His submarine had a tighter turning radius than the destroyer. Every time Hutchins tried to position Borie for a killing shot, Hopman turned inside the destroyer's arc, preventing Borie's guns from bearing. Borie fired torpedoes. They missed, impossible to aim in 20-foot seas against a violently maneuvering target. U-405 fired torpedoes back. They missed for the same reason. The two ships circled each other like wounded animals, guns blazing, neither able to land a decisive blow. Below decks, Lieutenant Brown sent a message to the bridge. The forward engine room was completely flooded. Only the starboard engine was running. Auxiliary power was failing. Fresh water for the boilers was gone. They were running on salt water, which was destroying the system. Maximum speed, 10 knots. Borie was dying, but she wasn't done fighting. Hutchins knew the mathematics. They were 690 miles from the Azores. Intelligence had reported up to 50 German submarines in the area. His ship could barely move. If U-405 got away and called for help, Borie would be swarmed. One of these ships had to sink. Tonight. At 2:57 a.m., 1 hour and 4 minutes after the first radar contact, U-405 began sinking, stern first. Hutchins later said, "When the submarine sank, there was a yell that went up from all hands. It probably could be heard in Berlin." Robert Maher watched the submarine's bow rise into the air, silhouetted against the night sky. Then an underwater explosion, likely Hopman setting scuttling charges to prevent capture. U-405 disappeared beneath the North Atlantic. For exactly 30 seconds, Borie's crew celebrated. They'd done it. A 23-year-old destroyer with a crew of reservists had defeated a modern German submarine in close combat. They'd survived. Then they saw the rafts. Approximately 14 German sailors were abandoning U-405 in yellow rubber life rafts. Several were on stretchers, badly wounded. The last man to leave wore an officer's cap, probably the one who'd set the scuttling charges. They were 50 to 60 feet from Borie's hull. Hutchins made the decision immediately. Prepare to pick up survivors. And here's the thing you need to understand. These men had just tried to kill each other for over an hour. Hand-to-hand combat. Medieval warfare on modern ships. Americans and Germans shooting each other at distances where you could see faces. But the battle was over. Military law, the ancient law of the sea, said you rescue survivors, even enemy survivors, especially in the North Atlantic in November, where water temperature kills in minutes. Hutchins maneuvered Borie closer, 50 feet, 40 feet. His crew prepared lines and rescue nets. Then the Germans fired very star flares into the sky, bright red, arcing up into the darkness. An answering flare appeared on the horizon. Then another. Sound man. Earl Potter's voice cut through the bridge. "Torpedoes bearing 220. Sonar had picked up torpedo screws, bearing directly toward Borie. Hutchins had maybe 5 seconds to decide. On one side, 14 German sailors in life rafts, wounded, dying of hypothermia, the survivors of a ship his crew had just destroyed. On the other side, 156 American sailors aboard Borie. His crew, his responsibility. The torpedoes were closing. Borie could barely make 10 knots with her damaged engines. She couldn't outrun torpedoes. She could only maneuver. And the only heading that would evade the torpedoes ran directly through the German survivors. Hard to port, heading 220, all available speed. Robert Maher later wrote, "Unfortunately, this heading caused us to cut through the group of survivors." Borie's damaged hull turned. The propeller churned. The destroyer accelerated to 10 knots, all she had left, and she ran directly over the yellow rubber rafts. In the darkness, the American sailors could hear screaming. Then silence. The torpedoes passed astern. Whether they were real or a false sonar contact, no one would ever know. Post-war German records show no other U-boat at that position. But in that moment, with the sonar pinging and the soundman certain, Hutchins had to choose. None of U-405's 49 crewmen were ever recovered. Not one. Korvettenkapitän Rolf-Heinrich Hopman, the skilled commander who'd fought brilliantly against impossible odds, died either from the 4-inch shell that hit his conning tower or in the rafts afterward. 49 men, all hands lost. And the Americans had to live with what they'd done. But Borie's fight wasn't over. As dawn broke on November 1st, damage control teams assessed the hull. The news was catastrophic. The ramming had opened seams along the entire port side. The forward engine room was flooded and would never restart. The starboard engine was running on salt water, destroying itself with every revolution. Auxiliary power was failing. Steering was compromised, and they were 690 miles from the nearest land, with German wolf packs all around. Hutchins sent an encrypted message to USS Card. Damage severe, attempting to reach Azores. They wouldn't make it. Hour by hour, Borie died. By 9:00 a.m., the last turbine stopped. No engine power. By 11:00 a.m., Hutchins transmitted. Commenced sinking. The Atlantic was winning. Water rose in compartments faster than pumps could remove it. The old destroyer, built in 1920, held together by rivets and welds that were older than most of the crew, was breaking apart. At 4:30 p.m., 16:30 hours, Hutchins gave the order no captain wants to give. Abandon ship. The crew had 18 minutes to get off, and this is where the tragedy compounded. Remember those 20-foot waves from the battle? By afternoon on November 1st, they'd grown to 40 feet. Water temperature, still 44 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill in under 15 minutes. Air temperature, near freezing. Wind, gale force. Visibility, dense fog, and heavy rain. 2 destroyers, USS Goff and USS Borie, moved in to rescue Borie's crew. Life rafts went into the water, sailors jumped, lines were thrown, and the seas tried to kill everyone. Hutchins later described it in an interview. Although the abandoning was very orderly, when the rafts got alongside the rescue ships, the rolling and pitching of those ships resulted in the loss of men. Many were just unable to get over the side. 40-foot waves lifted rafts level with the rescue ship's decks 1 second, then dropped them 30 feet the next. Sailors reached for lines, missed, fell between the ships. Borie's bow, rising and falling in the swells, plowed through a cluster of rafts in the darkness. Men were crushed between steel hulls. Others were knocked unconscious and drowned. Lieutenant Morrison R. Brown, the engineering officer who'd stood neck-deep in water at the throttle controls during the ramming, was lost in the rescue. After saving his crew during the battle, he died trying to save them again. One officer held onto a screw guard, helping shipmates climb aboard, until hypothermia took him and he let go. Robert Maher claimed to be the last survivor pulled from the water, nearly frozen. 156 men aboard Borie when she abandoned ship. 129 rescued. 27 killed during rescue operations, 3 officers and 24 enlisted men. Not one American died during the battle. Every single casualty happened during the rescue, crushed, drowned, or frozen in those 40-foot North Atlantic seas. Borie refused to sink. At dawn on November 2nd, she was still afloat, listing heavily, but afloat. Goff and Borie attempted to scuttle her with torpedoes. All missed in the heavy seas. They tried gunfire. The shells hit, but Borie wouldn't go down. Finally, at 9:55 a.m., a TBF Avenger torpedo bomber from Squadron VC-9 dropped a 500-pound bomb directly onto her. USS Borie sank at position 50 dig 12N, 30 dig 48W. She'd been in commission for 23 years, 7 months, and 9 days. 9 days later, on November 10, 1943, the surviving crew of Borie stood on the flight deck of USS Card for a ceremony. The entire task group, Task Group 2114, received the Presidential Unit Citation. Admiral Royal E. Ingersoll personally pinned the Navy Cross on Lieutenant Charles H. Hutchins. Lieutenant Morrison R. Brown received the Navy Cross posthumously for remaining at his post in the flooded engine room. Machinist's mate, Second Class Irving R. Salm, received the Navy Cross for returning to that same flooded compartment to secure a vital valve, risking his life to save the ship. 2 Silver Stars, multiple commendations. Captain Arnold J. Isbell, commander of USS Card, wrote in his endorsement, The Borie's final two actions exemplify the finest fighting, traditions of the naval service. Only the loss of 3 officers and 24 men after the Borie was abandoned mars the joy in these two splendid victories. Hutchins went on to command another destroyer, USS Doran. He survived the war, retired to Hilton Head, South Carolina, died in 1992 at age 79, never having spoken publicly much about that night. Robert Maher, the fire controlman who had a box seat for the battle, spent decades processing what he'd witnessed. He co-wrote Sailor's Journey into War in 1998, winning the U.S. Naval Institute Distinguished Author of the Year award. He needed to tell the story, to make sense of it. The survivors carried it with them. The close-quarters combat, the German sailors they'd killed at arm's length, the 14 men in yellow rafts they'd run over to save themselves, the 27 shipmates who survived the battle only to drown during rescue. The Navy commissioned a new USS Borie, DD-704, an Allen M. Sumner-class destroyer, on September 21, 1944. She fought at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. On August 9, 1945, a kamikaze hit her, killing 48 and wounding 66. She was one of the last destroyers damaged in World War II, struck just 6 days before Japan surrendered. She served in Korea. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, she forced a Soviet submarine to surface. In Vietnam, she fired over 7,000 rounds. The name Borie kept fighting. After November 1943, the Atlantic Fleet quietly reinforced the bows of many flush-deck destroyers with steel beams and concrete in the forward peak tanks, just in case ramming became necessary again. But naval tactics were already changing. Radar-guided gunnery, long-range sonar, aircraft with depth charges. By 1944, destroyers didn't need to get close enough to ram submarines. The Battle of USS Borie versus U-405 remained unique, the most savage close-quarters destroyer submarine engagement of the war. Military historians still study it. Not as a tactical model, it was too chaotic, too improvised, too dependent on chance to replicate. But as something else. Here's what the story of USS Borie teaches us. War doesn't give you good choices and bad choices. It gives you terrible choices and worse choices. Charles Hutchins had to choose between ramming a submarine, an insane tactic that would probably destroy his ship, or letting it escape to sink Allied convoys. He chose to ram. He had to choose between rescuing 14 German survivors and protecting 156 American sailors from torpedoes. He chose his crew. Lieutenant Morrison R. Brown had to choose between abandoning his post in a flooding engine room or staying at the controls to give his ship a chance. He chose to stay. It killed him anyway, but not during the battle. During the rescue. 49 German sailors died. 49 men who were following orders, serving their country, doing their duty. 27 American sailors died. 27 men who won the battle and lost the peace. Killed not by the enemy, but by the Atlantic Ocean and the mechanical indifference of ships rising and falling in 40-foot seas. And the survivors lived with the memory of men they'd killed with knives and thrown shell casings, with the sound of Germans screaming as Borie's hull ran over their rafts, with the sight of shipmates drowning 20 feet away while waves made rescue impossible. How did a Naval Academy graduate who quit the Navy to run a packing company in Indiana become the commander of the most savage destroyer-submarine duel since John Paul Jones? The answer is, he became someone willing to make impossible choices. The Naval Academy taught him tactics. Destroyer duty taught him procedure. But civilian life taught him that when there's no good option, you pick the least bad option and live with the consequences. On November 1, 1943, 2 ships met in the North Atlantic. For 64 minutes, they fought at distances measured in feet, not miles. Medieval combat on modern warships. When it was over, both ships sank. 76 men died, and the survivors learned what war really costs. Not just your life, but the weight of choosing who lives and who dies when there's no right answer. That's the story of when a destroyer rammed a U-boat and left the crew in the water. Not because the men were cruel, but because war is. If you found this story compelling, there are hundreds more like it in history. Moments where ordinary people made extraordinary choices under impossible circumstances. Subscribe, and I'll keep bringing them to you. This has been the story of USS Borie, DD-215. Remember her name.